Ladies and gentlemen, this Red Gaming Tech.com video, we're going to be discussing AMD's Mantle, which is a low-level graphics API for GPUs. Now, this is not just for PC gamers, it's also going to be pretty damn important for console gamers as well. And in theory, at least, we're going to be seeing a much better performance from games when they are going to be utilizing Mantle. Now, I did mention it was going to be from AMD, but all the indicators show that it's also going to be usable, providing NVIDIA does some changes for NVIDIA GPUs as well. So in other words, GeForce owners are going to be pretty damn set with this. As it turns out, however, this is going to especially benefit the owners of GCN architecture GPUs. So for example, Radeon 7000 series owners are going to be benefiting from this or later. So we're going to spend a few minutes discussing what the need for it is, and then we're going to discuss a lot more besides. Now, we're going to be going into this fairly briefly because this is a huge topic. I actually am re-recording this because I already went into it for like 15 minutes. I hadn't even touched on the subject. So what I'm going to be doing is putting out another video to go into this a lot more in depth rather than kind of discussing too much in a single video, because it becomes really confusing, I think, for people. So what is Mantle and why is it being developed? Well, let's discuss why first. For PC owners, you're probably going to be intimately familiar with DirectX and OpenGL, both of which are a higher level API. And what that basically means is that they are developed for the purpose of working on a wide variety of pieces of hardware. So in other words, legacy GPUs, for example, more older kind of architecture GPUs, more modern GPUs as well, and it basically means you're never going to get full performance. Now, just to give you an idea, this gives a massive overhead to the CPU. So this basically means that you're going to be having a huge overhead, and this is going to affect draw calls. Now, if you're not familiar with draw calls, I'll briefly explain that. A draw call is basically the CPU issuing commands to the GPU, because everything that's unique in a scene, we're talking textures, we're talking lighting, we're talking character models, buildings, whatever it is, so geometry, characters, it doesn't matter. All of it needs to be rendered and created and drawn on screen, which is effectively the CPU's job. So in other words, it's telling the GPU what to do. Just to give you a course of reference, actually, in the previous generation of consoles, or the current generation of consoles, to be more accurate, I suppose. So that would be the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. You're looking at between 10 to 20,000 pieces of geometry in a solitary frame, so one frame of animation. And of course, depending on what the game is, you can get between, 30 to 60 frames per second. So you can imagine just how much data is being passed backwards and forwards. Now, the problem is, because PCs have a very high level of overhead, and also because multi-threading performance right now isn't as good as what it should be, you're basically getting situations where the GPU itself, the graphics system, is basically waiting for the CPU. And so you're maybe not getting maximum amount of GPU performance. So in other words, it's going to the performance levels will be going up and down. So think of it almost like a wavy graph rather than more of a kind of a linear straight line, which is obviously not particularly great. Now, for those of you with really good memories or following tech for a while, you may have remembered that Microsoft had previously in DirectX, or Direct3D shall I say, which is part of DX11 feature set, but in the previous generations, from version 9 to version 10 promised to reduce some of the stuff. What basically they did was try to reduce the overhead and make a lot of performance increases. They also did other bits and pieces as well, such as adding a lot more support for unified architectures for the GPU, but that's not really part of this anyway. And it helped. One of the theories behind this, of course, was that in a theoretical world, if you're running a DX11 game, or game in DX11, you were going to get better performance than in DX9. Or a DX10 game, you're going to get better performance than DX9. And so what they've tried to do is they've tried to bundle draw calls together. They've tried to minimize the use of draw calls, and there's whole guides on this. I mean, you can just Google draw calls, just for example, and you can see there's a lot of stuff, for example, on Unity or Unreal UDK, which of course are two very popular engines right now for multiple platforms, as it turns out. And developers will spend a lot of time trying to optimize the scene and so on, of course, which, you should do anyway. But this is one of the reasons that developers will tell you that a PC will be outperformed by a console with similar spec hardware. So just for example, if you've got a GPU with roughly the same performance as a console, then your GPU, the one inside your PC, will get spanked. And it's not because there's anything magical in the hardware or anything like that. It's simply because it's able to code much lower level, it's able to much better utilize it, and you're going to be getting situations where the console is consistently being utilized in the fullest extent possible. There are other issues, of course, which come into play, and I'm not sugarcoating those. Those include, but not limited to, large operating system. So, of course, in other words, you're going to be getting Windows, which is a larger OS. You're getting situations, of course, where developers may not port as efficiently as they should be, and much more besides. But effectively, this is one of the primary reasons behind it. However, there have been slides released, and it says that will work on all graphics core next to GPUs, and this is quotes, by the way. Enables 9 times the draw calls per second than other APIs by reducing CPU overhead. Enables higher graphics performance with direct access to all GPU features, new rendering techniques, and leverages optimizations work from next-gen consoles to PC. You may notice that last point, the fourth point, and it's very important because you might have also noticed that several interviews that I've been covering recently and doing some analysis on, a couple of the key guys over at AMD have stated numerous times that it's no longer a process of porting for the most part. It's actually becoming more a case of optimization. So in other words, you're more optimizing towards the feature set of a particular system. In other words, the title will most likely work in an arbitrary way. It may not be optimized in terms of the frames per second or whatever, but it's improving. Now, in December time, I'm not exactly sure of the date, but sometime in December, the next Battlefield is going to be the first title to utilize this, and this is with the Frostbite 3 engine. So, AMD are pretty much a major player in the next generation of systems. That's not taking away anything from the video. We've got some stuff to discuss on them in just a few minutes, actually in another video. It's got nothing to do with this, but they are producing, of course, the APUs, which are going to be sitting inside the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4, which, of course, are leveraging a variant of the GCN architecture. They're using the AMD Sea Islands, according to Microsoft themselves in a recent interview. Sea Islands, by the way, is just almost consider it like a rebadging of the 7000 series. There's basically no difference. So you can say that Sea Islands are pretty much part and parcel of the previous generation, also known as Southern Islands or the 7000 series. So don't worry about it if you're a bit unfamiliar with what the Sea Islands are. Anyway, so what about consoles? Well, there's actually two ways, generally speaking, to develop and program for a console. The first would be high level, the second would be low level. Now, a lot of developers, should I say, will start by the high level stuff. Consider it like their learning curve. Now, some developers, particularly those who are leveraging or playing or developing indie games, so just for example, the Terrarias and the Minecrafts, the games which aren't exactly going to ever be super resource heavy, they probably will never need to worry, at least for the foreseeable future, on low-level performance, in other words, low-level APIs, because they don't really need it because their titles aren't really that resource heavy anyway. But as developers become more familiar with the hardware and they feel the need for speed. In other words, they feel that they need to get more out of the performance. They feel that they need high resolution textures, better resolutions, shinier graphics, better physics, whatever they need. Then they're going to start to need to go lower and lower and lower and lower level. And there's multiple reasons for that, primarily because this is the console's weak point. It's a fixed piece of hardware. In other words, well, depending on obviously the Steam box, but let's talk about the Xbox One and the PS4, of course. You can't just go to, your local store, say, hey, you know what, I like the look of that GPU, I'm going to replace my Xbox One's GPU with this, or I'm going to replace my PlayStation 4 CPU with this. No, you simply cannot. That's just too bad. You may be able to replace arbitrary parts such as, I don't know, say the hard drive. But you simply won't be able to replace like the CPU or whatever. Although, having said that, and this is somewhat off topic, but I'll just throw it in anyway because I know you guys sometimes like random little facts, you can indeed sometimes do a little bit of an upgrade for certain consoles if you're very sneaky with the soldering iron. However, this completely invalidates warranty and normal software will not work on it. But for example, with the Xbox One, the original Xbox, you could actually replace the CPU with something faster, for example 1 GHz rather than 733 MHz, or you could solder on new RAM, or for example if you're the owner of like a NES or a Genesis, you could actually overclock the hardware and much more besides. But that's kind of going into dicey legal territory, which I will not discuss any further. Anyway, now there are already rumours that the Mantle API is very similar to that of the Xbox One's API. Some are going as far as to say it's pretty much a copy, others saying that it's heavily based upon it. AMD, of course, as any good company will not do, is confirm or deny it, so we just have to wait on that one. But what we do know is that Mantle can use things such as Direct3D, the higher level shader language, and much more besides. Higher level shading language, by the way, just in case you're unfamiliar, can be abbreviated with HLSL. Now, if that's true, that means, of course, invariably it will also support other applications and features. For example, we do know that the GCN architecture supports a lot of the DX 11.2 feature set. And this means that, as AMD have smugly pointed out, they're going to be able to support tiled resources. Tiled resources actually level 2, which is pretty damn cool. So what the hell does that mean? Well, I don't think for the moment we're going to be getting situations where we have a GPU, or a game comes out and it only works with AMD GPUs, in other words, where the only option is Mantle, because AMD do not own the majority of PC graphics space in terms of GPUs. They just simply don't. Most owners are still Nvidia. So in other words, that's still the best-selling graphics cards company. And even if it wasn't, even if it's 50-50, you're going to get situations, of course, where no game manufacturer wants to alienate potentially 50% of its, gamers. But what we will, in theory, be getting is much better ports or much better performance with Mantle. Now, I did mention that it does appear that Nvidia can leverage this technology. And the reason behind this is because the Mantle API is actually open. So they would actually need, talking Nvidia, they would have to actually need to create their own technologies and their own ways to integrate it with their GPU. I'm unfamiliar with I'm not exactly familiar with how they're writing their software at the moment, both companies. I do know that in some ways both GPUs are very similar. Both are using SIMD, so single instruction multi-data. Both, of course, are using stream processors. So some of the basics are there, but no doubt it would mean that Nvidia would have to change their driver structure around quite significantly. Now, I did mention that Frostbite 3 and Battlefield are going to be utilizing Mantle, but that doesn't equal or mean that this is going to be easy for all developers to swallow. However, if you're a developer that's working on Xbox One, PlayStation 4, it's possible that you're going to be able to port games a lot easier. That doesn't necessarily mean or preclude your usage of DirectX. But the slides, for example, in regards to Mantle show that, and this is with Frostbite 3, will render natively on Mantle, so it will be like a switch. It's being developed right now. It will be used instead of DirectX 11. It improves the CPU performance, so it's very low overhead rendering, and loading and streaming, perfect parallel rendering, so it utilizes all 8 CPU cores. Obviously, this would indicate that you need a CPU that's got 8 cores. It'll reduce the bottlenecking on the GPU and system, as I mentioned with the draw calls. Full access to the graphics hardware, and lots of low-level optimizations are made. And this is only the beginning, and there are many more games on Frostbite which will most likely utilize Mantle. Okay, so if it all works, everything's great, and Mantle is the way to go. Kinda. Now, when I was younger, there used to be a company known as 3DFX, and they created the Voodoo chipset. Subsequently, they've got purchased by NVIDIA, if you ever wondered what happened to them. Now, they created their own API, which was a wrapper. It was basically known as Glide. Now, as it turns out, certain titles, for example, Quake, versions of Quake using the id Tech engine, Half-Life, and many others besides, used Glide. And if the Voodoo cards did, they would spank their competition. Why? Because they weren't using a generic set. They were using specific instructions wrote for their card. In other words, the other GPUs just couldn't compete. To put it another way, however, if you were to then decide, you know what I'm going to do, I'm just going to, just for laughs, change the API, and I'm going to put it to OpenGL or DirectX or whatever, you would notice that your performance really does tank. I can't remember what the benchmarks are because, we're talking early 90s or whatever. I was pretty damn young at the time, so I wasn't really good enough at PCs to do benchmarking anyway, if I'm completely and utterly honest. But you can, do the research yourself. Back when I used to frequent Tweak 3D and so on. And, yeah, basically, their cards used to perform very well utilizing this, but developers started to shy away, and this is one of the reasons that 3DFX started to have problems. DirectX and OpenGL, however, eventually won out, because developers, let's say you're a NVIDIA owner, you're not going to be very happy if a game runs significantly better on Glide than it does OpenGL. Right? This is the problem. You're a developer, you can only develop, you've only got a certain amount of funds. So it really comes down to how this is going to be implemented. Because one of the reasons that 3DFX eventually crumbled, there's numerous reasons, including piss poor spending of company funds, from what I've heard. Some really interesting choices with some of the specifications of their card. For example, very late 32-bit rendering, so they were utilizing what was effectively a 24-bit internal rendering, which outputted to like 16-bit, I think. Color space, which was crap compared to what people were really wanting. Although, to be honest with you, the comparative cards at the time at 32-bit high resolutions, they couldn't really output it anyway because the GPUs just weren't fast enough. But the thing is, you had the GeForce, well, back then, the Riva TNTs. You had, AMD coming out with graphics cards as well. Matrox have put out cards and so on. Right now, of course, you've got Intel who are putting out SoC type of GPUs, which I don't really think are going to affect things too much because most serious gamers are not really going to be utilizing Intel, discrete Intel SoCs to do much gaming on, maybe, unless it's something like I don't know, like a laptop or something, but most games are going to go with NVIDIA or AMD. But Glide was quite harmful. I think most would agree with that. Of course, the Voodoo owners, as I said, loved it. And I think for the purposes of this, AMD owners will love it. Possibly even NVIDIA if they choose to utilize it. The problem is, DirectX and OpenGL both have issues. John Carmack has stated that he actually prefers OpenGL. This is his words, not mine. Just because he prefers the feature set and so on, which is, okay, fine, fair enough. I'm not going to argue with him because he knows about it more than I do. I'll just be completely frank. I'm not going to argue with someone who has considerably more knowledge than I. I don't know if his is more opinion based or the engines he's working on, or just because he's more familiar with it or whatever, but those are his opinions. The bottom line is, however, that we are in a situation where we need to improve things, and Mantle definitely does offer this. It also means that for gamers who are, games developers, shall I say, who are wanting to create multi-platform titles, theoretically speaking, it would make things a hell of a lot easier. Porting would be just a cinch. It would be so easy. The problem is, two. One, games on an Xbox One or PlayStation 4 are, forever going to be using the same feature set. Now, obviously, you're going to better utilize compute. Yes, you're going to better utilize, a certain feature. But the GPU will not add features. You will not have extra instructions embedded on the CPU. You will not suddenly get DirectX 12, just for example. This is not the case for GPUs. The case of GPUs is we're going to be getting better technology, whatever that might be. It may be that it comes out of your PC at night and makes you pancakes. But the purpose being that there will always be improvements towards the structure. Therefore, you're still going to have to write this pretty smartly, because sure, there's a lot of crossover now between the GCN architecture of now and the next generation GCN architecture of, say, the PlayStation 4 and so on. And this is going to remain pretty consistent for a while, but new GPUs come out pretty fast. 2, 3, 4 years down the line, it's very hard to know what's going to happen. It also means that potentially we're going to get situations where developers have less time to optimize for, say, DirectX. However, it does mean that we're going to be getting much better cross-platform development right now, and who knows what technologies they're really utilizing and going to be creating. I'm pretty damn excited with it. I've mentioned before that I actually, in terms of the direction, the vision of development between Intel and AMD, so in other words the two CPU sides of things, I don't really like the vision Intel has. I don't like the enclosed system idea that it has. I much prefer the vision of AMD. At first, I wasn't really sure about APUs for PCs, but when AMD have recently reassured us that we still have the option for the discrete GPUs and all, I really do want them to, strive forward, because they've been the underdog for a while. Sure, they were kicking ass for a certain period of time with the Athlons, but, for a while they've been kind of the underdog. They did fairly well with the Radeon 6000 series and 7000 series, but recently, of course, the victory of scoring both PlayStation and Xbox custom for the next generation is certainly helping things. I, for one, am optimistic, actually. I think that providing the technologies and the tool sets are good enough, we're going to be getting very interesting performance, actually. And I think the future is going to be extremely exciting. So yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. It's been a bit of an itsy bitsy one. There's a lot that I still need to discuss, but this has already become fairly lengthy. As per normal, if you would like to contact me directly, you can do so by going to facebook.com/redgamingtech, and you can address me directly because there are a couple of us on the channel, so you can address it to Paul or Crimson Rain. Either way is good with me. Anyway, I'm going to get going because I still need to record, like, more things than what is probably healthy for a person to record. So I'm going to get going. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.